Release all loose items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Sentimental journey back home.
This is Nathan Hartman for the DBC. Greetings, skippers, and welcome to another episode of Dreamfinders, a radio program about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. This week, skipper David John Marley used to sail the rivers of the world for the Jungle Navigation Company at Disneyland, but he's since made good and now teaches history in California. But even if you take the skipper out of the jungle, you can't take the jungle out of the skipper, and so Marley has rubbed elbows with other retired adventurers and compiled 2 whole volumes of the best Jungle Cruise stories money can buy. All of them true, and all of them whiz-bangers. Marley chats with yours truly about what it takes to be a great skipper, looking at the Jungle Cruise from a historian's perspective, and the greatest pranks he's ever pulled on the job. Don't change the station. All of that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders.
David John Marley, welcome to Dreamfinders.
Thank you so much for having me.
So clearly there's a ton of stuff that you've been up to, very Jungle Cruise related, and we're going to get into all of that. But I want to start with just asking you, did you grow up in a Disneyland family? Was it a family that went to the parks often?
I grew up in Orange, which was about maybe 7 or 8 miles away from the park. So it was a part of my existence. Every night, like in the summer, we had to be home by the time the fireworks went off. So in my neighborhood, that's when you knew it was time to come in. And our neighbors worked there. I grew up going there frequently. My dad was an executive at Baskin-Robbins in the 70s when they had a promotion deal with Disney. So we used to get tickets so we could go. And like when Disney would put out a movie like Herbie the Love Bug, they had Herbie Crunch ice cream. So they had like a crossover kind of a deal. And so I got to go to the studio once with my dad to go to a screening of a film. And when I was in 3rd grade, I got to spend the night with my mom and dad at Walt Disney's house at Smoke Tree Ranch in Palm Springs.
Oh, wow. What was that like?
That was really fun. It was with with the Disney Studios executive and his kids. And I just remember playing in the pool, and the pool was really rough and cut up my feet. But it was really neat, this neat little bungalow in Palm Springs. And none of my friends believed me that I went. My mom has pictures to prove that I was there. But so it was always a part of my existence. But as I say in my first Skipper Stories book, when I was 7 or 8, my sister, who had just got her driver's license, took me to Disneyland for the day. And I don't remember anything about the whole day there except for one moment. We were at the Jungle Cruise, and we were waiting in line to get in the boat next, and the skipper comes down and like kneels next to me, and he's asking me, "Where are you from and what are you here for?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Orange." And he goes, "Oh, why are you here?" I said, "I don't know. My sister just took me out of school to bring me here today." And he looks my sister up and down, and he leans in close to me and goes, "You better watch her. She's going to ask for something." And at that moment, I said, I'm going to be a skipper when I grow up. And that was my lifelong goal that I finally got to achieve.
Yeah, and you were doing like you've done several odd jobs getting to that position. You were, if I'm correct, a school bus driver before the Jungle Cruise. So what was that like? Is there anything that you learned about hauling people around on a bus that you were able to then implement into hauling people around a jungle?
Well, the most important thing with the bus was just being safe. That's all our main focus of, having a bus full of little kids. You wanted to get them to school and home alive. So the safety thing was there, but we had to do a little safety spiel, and I would always throw jokes in. But because Jungle Cruise was always kind of in the back of my mind that I wanted to do that one day. Never knew when, but one day.
Why was that, though? I mean, why that one particularly? There's so many other rides, and I think this isn't just you, but an attraction for lots of people. What makes the Jungle Cruise stick out?
I like it. Well, I like the performance aspect of it. I grew up wanting to be an actor and get involved in theater. Then I realized I'm just an attention whore. I don't really have any skills as an actor. I just like doing comedy. And that's why I did stand-up after I left Jungle for a while. So I liked that aspect of it. I liked being outside, and you get to go through the attractions. You're not just sitting there pushing a button. You get to experience it with the guests, and every boat was different. I like having a nice rotating room full of guests to entertain all the time. So to me, there was no downside to it. It was a beautiful place to work, and you got to tell lots of jokes. And so I figured the people I work with would be fun, and that turned out to be very true. So, it was just, I went there and applied. I'm like, it's just Jungle. I don't care about anywhere else. I just want to work the Jungle Cruise.
And that did not necessarily happen right away. You ended up sort of trapped in a temple, like so many unlucky explorers over at Indiana Jones for a while, correct?
Correct. Although I never got trained on that attraction. I was actually Indiana Jones guest control. So I didn't know how to work anything. I was just in charge of putting up ropes and watching the boats go by. And in both of my books, I'm stunned. There are some skippers that are hysterically funny, and they got sent off to all kinds of random places in the park. A former student of mine spent 3 years trying to get to Jungle Cruise. They sent her to California Adventure, and then when she transferred to Disney, they sent her to Fantasyland, not Adventureland. But she stuck with it because that's what she wanted to do, and has been there for, I think, 3 years now and loves it.
And that was sort of your thing too, was perseverance. Tell us a little bit about how you finally convinced them to get you on the Jungle Cruise.
So I was working one summer as a seasonal employee before I went off to grad school in Washington, D.C. So I knew this was might be my only time to work there. And I just kept bugging people, but it never seemed like it was going to happen. And one day I had a shift at Indiana Jones guest control with a guy that had been there at least 10 years. And we were working the ropes, and I was talking about Jungle, and then at break, he goes, "Come here, I'm going to get you on that stupid ride. You won't stop talking about it." And he walked me over to where scheduling was. And he knew all the people in the scheduling department. He said, "This guy wants to be a skipper. Get him in there and train him." And I remember watching, and they're scrolling down the timesheets on the computer. They're like, "We are booked for the summer. Every spot of people getting trained at Jungle, it's going to be full. We don't have any positions." So my friend just taps the screen and goes, "That guy, just get rid of him and put this guy in instead." So they just delete this guy's name and typed my name in. And they go, "Congratulations, you'll be a skipper next week." And I felt so bad I don't even remember the other person's name, but he lost his chance to go to Jungle Cruise because I was being obnoxious about it. And that's how I got there the first time.
So you finally get in here. You get into this thing you've always died to be in. Run us through the process, how you learned about the operational workflow of the ride. I think, as guests, we sort of see that, there's a couple of people on the dock and there's people driving the boats, of course, and that sort of thing. But what is that process like? How many people does it take to keep that show rolling?
It takes an awful lot. You can have over 20 people working at that attraction, which is like, in some cases, 5 times more than any other place, which is why I think Disney sometimes gets nervous about the Jungle Cruise because it does take so many people to run it. We ran it one morning with 4 people, which is the minimum, because there were a bunch of people that called in sick. So we ran it that way for about an hour, where you could run Mansion or Pirates or almost anything else with 4 people just fine. With us, it was just only one boat. But it takes a lot of people, and you work in different rotations, so you might be working with the same 4 people for your whole 8-hour shift, but there'll be like 3 or 4 or 5 other groups of 4 people also working with you and around you. So you have to learn to work as a group of 4 people, and you have to learn to work as a bigger team. And then you have to learn to work with the rest of the park. If another attraction breaks down, we would pull on more boats because we know we're going to get busier. So there's like a lot more levels to it than I assumed there was.
You say in the book about being a skipper that the quote is, "People thought they should be Humphrey Bogart, but I thought we should all be Groucho Marx." Take us through that process of creating your skipper personality and what you think that sort of role is supposed to be for that ride.
There was a great debate at Jungle Cruise, and I'm actually working on a history of the Jungle Cruise for Theme Park Press. It'll come out in the spring of 2020. But there's a great debate over whether you should follow the script and keep to that no matter what and follow these guidelines, or if your main goal is just to entertain guests and you will do whatever it takes, including going off the script. And it's a big argument between the kind of the two sides. I think 75% of the skippers go on the let's be the wild side, and the company tends to favor the let's just stick to the script. But I definitely come from that Groucho Marx, I'm going to say what I want, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this group of people have a good, fun, unique experience. Ooh. And so I did stand-up for years, and when I teach in my regular classes, I tell a lot of jokes. I'm rather silly, and people think it's an act, but that's just kind of how I am 24/7. So like my stand-up routine and my skippering wasn't a whole lot different than who I am normally. But for some people, they really did a performance. It was a character they would develop.
What sort of other comedic influences beyond Groucho Marx do you remember being influential on you as a kid?
As a kid, yeah, there was this movie theater in Anaheim called the Little Movie House, and they would show silent movies. And my oldest brother would take me to go see these things, like Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd and Laurel and Hardy. And I thought every little kid grew up seeing these movies in a theater with a person playing an organ and everything. And so I was influenced a lot by that kind of classic old school 20s and 30s comedy. But I also loved Steve Martin and guys like that growing up as a kid. So some more modern comics. But at the Jungle Cruise, they would just kind of take on whoever the popular comic was at that moment. People would just adopt their persona or take some of that personality for themselves, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about the perception, or sort of the we'll call it a sixth sense of a skipper. Could you eye a crowd getting into a boat and determine very quickly how good of a cruise you'd have?
Yes. Oh, you asked such a great question. That I think is one of the best skills a skipper needs to have. The most important skill a skipper needs to have is the ability, because you'll be at the dock for maybe 10, 15 seconds. And that's all the time you get to look at this audience and say, okay, is it mostly older people? Is it younger people? Do they speak English? What are they into? And so you're telling jokes as they enter the boat, but you're also watching how they interact with each other and how they're interacting with the skippers as they're getting on the boat. Are they happy to be there? Or are they just waiting in line for Indiana Jones? It also depends on is it morning? Is it night? Is there, is it really hot? Is it cold or rainy? And it's served me so well. I can go into almost any environment and size up a room of people pretty quickly and see what material will work with them. But it was a lot of fun to see what people might be into.
Let's talk a little bit about those non-English speakers that end up on your boat. Is there any saving grace for those trips? It seems like the most difficult of acts to have to attempt.
If you get a whole boat of people that don't speak English, then you have to go to the real physical stuff and point out stuff. And that's where I think my liking of Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd and whatnot and Buster Keaton came in handy. But I didn't get too many of those. They were somewhat rare, and it depended on the group. Some groups were very polite, and some groups would just yell and scream in their language the whole time, like yell to each other. Mm-hmm. And if you realized it was just going to be chaotic yelling and you weren't going to get through to them, you'd speed up the boat and make the boat a little bit quicker. Most trips were supposed to be around like 9 to 10 minutes. I was famous for doing at least a 12-minute tour, and the more people laughed, the slower I would go. But I could get you off the boat in 6 to 7 minutes if you weren't laughing. I would just floor it, and we would be gone. So it really depended. I never did like the toaster tour where I would just point at things and say toaster and get a whole boatload of people to try to follow along with me. Because I was always afraid there'd be an English speaker on the boat who'd be listening and might just be too afraid to raise their hand and admit they know English. Because I know some skippers that did a toaster tour, then someone else would go, "Why didn't you say anything during a trip?" And then a manager would hear that and they would get in trouble. So I never wanted to push that.
Another interesting boat experience, I imagine, would be celebrities. And you talk about this in Skipper Stories. It's rare, I think, that a cast member, anybody actually in entertainment, gets a personal opportunity to perform for A-list actors. But that's sort of what the Jungle Cruise is.
Yeah.
Any good visitors while you were there?
There were so many. And some of them, they would have gotten there right after I left or right before I got there. But there were certain celebrities that everybody loved, like Tom Hanks and, oh God, what was his name? Ray Romano's brother on Everybody Loves Raymond. Brad Garrett. Evidently would keep a list of names of skippers' boats he'd been on because he wanted to ride a different skipper every time to get a different experience.
Oh, wow. Dedicated.
And yeah. And boy, I'm blanking on our names. This is not good. He's so famous. The lead guitarist for Led Zeppelin. Not Brian May. That's from Top Gear. Yeah. No, it was Brian May from Queen. That's right. It was Brian May from Queen because I could picture him. He came to the park and would ride different Jungle Cruise boats as well. So there were certain celebrities that were there to have fun, and then there were certain celebrities that were just there because it was the next thing that the guide took them on, and they really could care less.
Huh.
So, but most of the celebrities in my experience were familiar with performing and realized this person's about to perform, so they were usually a pretty good audience. Usually a pretty good audience. Yeah. The fun times is when you had a celebrity, but you weren't sure who they were. That was always interesting.
Did they ever feel like they needed to participate due to the fact that, I mean, it is sort of a stage and everyone's on it, or did they kind of enjoy being in the audience for themselves?
They seem to enjoy being in the audience. I had a friend that had Robin Williams on his boat who just sat there and just laughed at the guy's jokes, but didn't want to take the microphone or do anything. Usually the plaid, the guest control person who's with them, will get very upset if you try to talk to the celebrity at all, or even just a little bit. And so you don't try to interact with them or bring stuff. You don't want to bring them into it. This is their vacation, so it's their day off. So you might throw in a joke or two that's designed for them. But a lot of times they would ride a boat with other guests, and the rest of the boat has no idea this very famous person is sitting right in the front. And that's always fun. But it makes it a little bit different because you are a little nervous because you're thinking, okay, what if I do great? Is this person going to, want to hire me? And I had friends who were like, I'm going to be in a movie now because he saw how famous I was and how funny I was. I'm like, yeah, they're not going to remember who you are. just take the compliment and move on. But yeah, it added a fun little energy to it.
Let me ask you about plaids. Are plaids the sworn enemy of Jungle Cruise skippers, or who is the friction for a skip?
Anybody in authority, any manager automatically is just going to be seen as trouble, even if they had come up from the ranks. I think plaids. When a plaid showed up, you just knew you had to be on guard because that meant a celebrity was there. The worst thing that would happen is when the phone would ring and it was City Hall, which is where the plaids work. If City Hall called, that meant somebody was at City Hall complaining, so somebody was in trouble. But normally it was managers. And when I first got there, when I came back in the early 2000s, there were a great group of managers, and they would rotate them around every couple months, and they brought in a brand new group of people. And none of them had come up through the ranks of being ride operators. They were all hired from outside companies as managers. So they had no idea how to work the attraction, how to deal with guests. They were used to working at the Gap or being a manager at a restaurant. And it was kind of a Paul Pressler thing to bring in all these outsiders. And they weren't terribly successful. There was a couple managers who made it their stated goal to kind of break the wild spirit of the jungle. And we were happy to make sure that they all failed in that goal.
Speaking of that wild jungle, how does that actual environment, whether it be rain or nighttime, change how a skipper acts, how they do the cruise?
This is the one piece of advice I would give everybody listening. If you ride the Jungle Cruise, you have to ride it twice. Go once during the day and then go once at night. They are two completely different attractions. I had a daytime spiel and a nighttime spiel. And during the day, it's busy. So you're just trying to trying to get through and get the boats around as quick as possible because there's a lot of people waiting. At night, it's not as busy and there's fewer boats on the river, so you can take more time and do different jokes, and the jungle looks a lot different at night. It's scarier and spookier, so you can do and it's fewer kids on the boat at night, so you can do a whole different level of jokes. And what's interesting, I must have interviewed 70 skippers or more for all my work, and I found one skipper that preferred working the day rather than the night. And his only excuse was, I like day better because my night times I wanted to go out with my friends. So it didn't really have anything to do with the jungle cruise, but they all kind of, even when I had seniority there, I still preferenced night shifts because it was just a lot more fun.
You mentioned seniority, and you worked as a trainer as well on the jungle cruise.
Yeah.
Now, I think some people would think that would make you upper management, but honestly, that seems to have not stopped you from pranking as well. Tell me a little bit about the Mekong Maiden.
Oh, that was my favorite. Yeah, I think personally I got away with murder when I worked there because I was a little bit older. I was in my early 30s, like 29, 30, or early 30s, and I was working as a adjunct professor at Cal State Fullerton. So they always thought when something would happen, they're like, well, it's not David. He's responsible. He would never do something like that. So I found out later, they're like, you were never on our radar. We automatically crossed you out as not one of the troublemakers, which was awesome. Mekong Maiden. There used to be 10 boats or 12 boats at the Jungle Cruise originally from 1955 until 1996. And then they brought in the current boats. And I don't know about Florida, but this is at Disneyland in Anaheim. They went from having 12 boats to 10 because the 10 were bigger. So we couldn't actually fit 12 on the river usually have, at the max you'll have 8 or 9 running with some in the back for emergencies or whatnot. So they had to get rid of 2 boats. So they got rid of the Mekong Maiden and the Magdalena Maiden. And but there was a sign backstage that still had a list of all of the boat names. So with my trainees, I would walk by and I would say, here's a list of all the boat names. Make sure you memorize all of them. And I would always point out, here's the Nile, here's the Amazon, and the Mekong Maiden. I always make sure I said Mekong Maiden, even though it wasn't there. So make sure you have all these memorized. And I would wait till they were almost signed off or already had just been signed off as an official skipper. And I would tell them, hey, the manager wants you to go pull on the Mekong Maiden, so go back there and get it. So they take a setup, which is a box with ammo. When they had guns, they'd have the gun in there or the microphone, and they'd run off to the back storage. And we'd wait, and they'd come back out, and we would wave, go back, go back, go back. And they'd be afraid, they'd missed it somehow, and they'd go back in boat storage. And boat storage wasn't that big, either the boat was there or it wasn't. And there was a phone that was back there. So I would dial the phone, and they'd pick it up. I'm like, what are you doing? Stop screwing around. You're brand new. You can get fired. Bring that boat out. And we'd hang up, and we'd laugh and laugh and laugh. And then I would call back again, and I'd say, I'm opening the doors in 30 seconds. That boat better be there. And so we would. And usually the skipper would be there just waving their arms frantically, saying, don't close the doors, close the doors. And then finally we'd let him know that the Mekong Maiden hadn't been there in 15 years or whatever it was.
And the initiation was complete.
That was one of the initiations, yes.
So just because you're a prankster, of course, doesn't mean you don't get pranked. Do you remember any particular ones that got you really good?
I never got pranked. No one's ever asked me that before. I got to think about it, but I never. I did. I got pranked one time. Oh God, what a great question. I got pranked one time. You know those little pink forms? It says it's a message form while you were out.
Yes.
I can so I get there and there's a little notepad, and it has my name on it, and it says, call Mike at this extension. So I'm like, Mike? So I dial the 4-digit extension, and I hear Michael Eisner's office. I hung up the phone. I was, once my heart stopped beating, I found the notepad. I looked on the sheet to see who was coming into work next. And it was a buddy of mine, so I wrote his name on it, and I said, call Mike at this extension. And I left it for him. But that was good. They eventually disabled our ability to call we couldn't call Florida or the Burbank studios anymore, because I think Jungle Cruise skippers, we made it a regular part of our day. We would, City Hall would call and ask for our wait time. And we would say, oh, hold on, please. And we would transfer them to Florida. And so they kept reporting Florida's wait time pretty much for a whole summer. A manager came up. He's like, so, and I was a lead one day. He's like, Dave, how long is your wait? I'm like, oh, it's like a 5-minute wait. He's like, oh, why does the board on Main Street say 45 minutes? And I burst out laughing. And then I went, I don't know. And he just looked at me and then just walked away.
Oh, man.
What happened? They called once and they said, our wait time is 45 minutes and our fast pass time is 4:30. And the manager goes, you don't have a fast pass? I'm like, yes, we do. And they found out they'd been transferred to Florida. So that's how we got caught.
Oh, well, it worked for a while. I guess that's what counts.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
all cast members, of course, have specific lingo. Just being a cast member itself is lingo. But
Yeah.
skippers seem to take the cake when it comes to this. Care to explain Code M?
Oh, Code M is awesome. Code M, you get bored working there and you see a lot of the same people and things. And so Code M was like if a kid or somebody pees, it's a code U for urine or code V for vomit. So Code M means mullet. You know, the style with the short hair in the front and the long in the back. And we would call it out on the PA, like over the whole, like over the ride building where people were waiting in line. We'd say Code M, line 1, and people would look at the first line to see where the Code M was. And it just became an obsession with us to find all the great mullets that were out there. And then one day a skipper decided to play a game called Touch the Mullet, where he set up a score sheet and you got points for touching a mullet. And this one guy would win because he'd walk up, oh, excuse me, sir, you have something on your shoulder. And he would go to like brush away dust or something and touch the mullet and turn around and put his finger up for 1, saying 1 point. I was too scared to play Touch the Mullet. But yeah, there were codes for girls that changed over the decades I've been able to discover. But mullets or just weird hair in general always will get a shout out somehow.
Is that still a code that is relevant in the parks to this day?
I've heard skippers still use it. It kind of comes and goes with every generation. You don't see as many mullets as you used to. Maybe in the summer they show up more. But on Facebook or Instagram, I'll see skippers that will post pictures of guests with sweet mullets.
I suppose, here in Florida, we might have a better opportunity for Code M than maybe California. So
Maybe.
Maybe. In 2004, you had a chance to rewrite the Jungle Cruise script for Disneyland.
Yeah.
What were your hopes for that project? Were there things you really thought like it's time to make a change with this, or like any sort of tonal things that really were passions for you when it came to doing this project?
My number one passion, the thing I was the most adamant about, was the one thing I didn't think would happen, but I convinced Disney to make it happen, was they wanted to really crack down that you have to follow the script. Because Disney doesn't skippers will tell a joke and then you add on to it and you add on to it. And before you know it, you've offended half the audience and now they're all going to City Hall. It's just the nature of comedy. You build and build and build and then suddenly you're offensive. So they wanted to really crack down on that. And I'm clearly not one of the people that would go for that. So I said, if you want to crack down on the script and make sure people follow it, you have to give skippers the ability to add to the script. It can't be this sacred document that can only be touched when Imagineering gives us new jokes. We have to be able to submit them and send them off to Burbank to get them approved and then sent back to us to add to the script. And so that was one thing I fought for most of the summer and was surprised. We made a form that people could fill out and submit their requests, and they'd send it up to Burbank. And that was, I thought, the happiest, because the jungle changes over time. Certain jokes become popular, then they're not popular, or certain topics become fun to talk about and then they get kind of passé, and you have to be able to adjust it because skippers will go off. I mean, we're alone with guests and you can't spy on all of them all of the time. So you have to give them you can't constantly be firing people for going off script. So I thought that was a good way to allow people to add jokes and add their own individual comedy to it. So I consider that my crowning achievement as a Jungle Cruise skipper, was getting that pushed through, the ability for us to add things to have it permanently put in the script.
around this time, and you were doing adjunct work as well. You were teaching history classes. Why history? Is there something about history that always interested you as a kid, or when did that passion start as well?
Yeah, I always loved history, and it's just I liked studying like British history, but my focus was modern American history. And I remember originally in my undergraduate, I'd been a religion major, and I would get like a B or a C or a D in a class, and then I would take history for fun, and I got an A on every like history class I took. Matter of fact, one professor came in once and he's shaking the exams. He's like, "Can anybody tell me why the highest grade in this class was not by a history major?" And my friends looked at me. I'm like, maybe I should switch majors. Because it's storytelling. And I remember being at a history conference, and that's as exciting as it sounds. And they were talking in very large academic jargon. And I was just sitting there taking notes, and I wrote down, "I'm not a historian. I think I'm a storyteller. That's what I am." And then 3 months later, I found a quote from Walt Disney saying that's what he thought he was a storyteller. It's like, I'm not an animator about this. I am just a storyteller. And I went, yeah, all right. Like I showed up where Walt was. It's the same kind of concept. But yeah, I love history. It's stories, and it's a lot of fun.
Is there anything you learned from being a skipper that translated to the classroom?
I think my students would tell you I talk too much about it in the classroom. That's why I started a class on the history of Disneyland that I taught for years, and I hope to bring it to Cal State Fullerton soon. But I'd already kind of picked the skill up from teaching, but at Jungle Cruise, you just got to hone it. I got, I think, good at being able to watch an audience or a classroom, and I can see who understands what I'm saying and who doesn't understand it, and who thinks I'm funny and who's sick of hearing me talk. And I can adapt things. I can either, ramp it up intellectually or kind of dumb it down. I can attach it to wherever the audience is. And I thought that was a great skill that Jungle Cruise really helped me adapt to pretty quickly.
Let me ask you about that class. What is the curriculum for a history of Disneyland class?
I found out from Dave Smith, the late Dave Smith, who recently passed away, unfortunately. I met him once, and I was explaining my class to him, and he said I had the very first history of Disneyland class he'd ever heard of, that focused just specifically on the class, which was fun. But then I realized there's no model for me to go off of, which was okay because I got to make it up on my own. And I usually used David Koenig's books, the Mouse Tales books, Mouse Tales and More Mouse Tales as a introductory, then added articles and other stuff to it. And since we were in Orange County, we could have a field trip to the park, which was a lot of fun. And it was a lot of history of the park and how it impacted Orange County. And I brought in everything, how gender played a role, how race played a role, how it affected tourism and industry. And students were getting business credit for it. It was like a business history class for some people. So it was a lot of fun to teach.
In 2004, this also marks the final year as a skipper for you. Yeah. Why was it time to leave?
I had just gotten a full-time tenure track job, and I'd had that for a year, and I was working at the park on the summers and on weekends, and then I was a professor full-time at a university. And then my wife got pregnant somehow. I don't know how that happens.
Storks or something.
So I do. Yeah, so I'm like, all right, I'm trying to finish my dissertation, which was my first book. A publisher wants it, so I got to finish that. And I got this job where I'm trying to get tenure, and then I've got Disneyland and a baby. I got to drop one of these things, and so that's how I knew. And I'll tell you the whole story if you want to hear it.
Of course.
I talked with my wife. I'm like, okay, all right, I gotta leave Disney. She was due in early September. This was like May. I thought, well, maybe. She's like, why don't you quit now and we can have the summer together before the baby comes? And I'm like, okay. So we're sitting in my car at the employee parking lot, and I'm like, I do not want to quit. I need a sign. If I'm going to quit, I need a sign that it's time to quit. And knowing Disney, they'll make me work Fantasmic all summer, or something bad will happen, but I need a sign because I don't want to do it. I don't feel it. So I walk into scheduling, and it's back when they would post it on paper and just stick it on the wall. And instead of having a T for Tiki or a J for Jungle, it had, I think it was SP for Special Project, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 for like 2 weeks. And I saw that. My first response is, well, there's my sign. I don't know what that is, but I'm not doing it. I am not doing it. That's the sign. And I walk into the manager's office. I'm like, what does SP stand for? And he says, oh, yeah. I forgot. There's a team of people. We're going to be rewriting the script and working with Imagineering all summer. And would you like to be a part of the team that does that script? If you want to do it, you'll be working backstage all summer long. You won't have to wear a costume. You won't be driving a boat every day. You get paid $1 more an hour. Would you like to do that? So I called my wife. I'm like, honey, God wants me to stay at Disneyland all summer long. And so that's how I spent my last summer. I'd been there for 3 years at that point, but I got to hang out with 6 other skippers, and we would just write jokes all day. And there was an Imagineer that worked with us and a manager that was there. And it was one of the most fun summers of my life. And I remember one morning before the park opened, they put us in a boat. And they said, okay, we want to watch each of you do your regular trip. It's like, you can't get in trouble for it, but I want to see what your regular trip is. So I did mine. And my friends were laughing, and the manager and the Imagineer were staring at me. And when we get back to the dock, the head lead goes, you only do one joke that's on the script, and it's the backside of water. I go, yeah, well, the script sucks. And he goes, we had no idea. We thought you were 100% LOG, meaning like you were 100% on script, because that's what we all assumed. I went, no. He goes, you never get complaints. I said, yeah, because I'm not dirty. I'm not cracking dirty jokes. I'm not being foul. It's clean. It fits the theme of Jungle Cruise. It's just my own stuff and stuff I've stolen from my friends. I just didn't think the script was funny. So that was a great summer. We had a lot of fun writing stuff and testing jokes out, and it was a real blast. And it gave me my first hint at how intense the Disney fandom can be online. We'd had this meeting. There were 10 of us in a room, and they showed us blueprints. We're going to put piranhas in here. We're going to add an explosion over there. And this Imagineer explained all the changes that we had to work with. And we're like, cool. I was like, don't tell anybody. It's very secret. I didn't even tell my wife what I'd seen. The next morning we come back to work. Manager walks in. All right, who talked? Somebody talked, and it's on this website. And he brought it up on the screen. All of the changes. There's only 10 of you that know who talked. And at lunch, my buddy goes, I just told one friend. I didn't think he was going to tell anybody. He goes, he works for that website. He's the one that wrote the article. He goes, he promised he wouldn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. That secret did not last long.
No, not long at all.
Yeah.
This leads, of course, to sort of a way to scratch an itch, which is the Skipper Show.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I within like 3 months of leaving Jungle Cruise, I missed performing and missed the laughter. And I got asked to do, they wanted me to do a Jungle Cruise tour, like project it on a screen and stand in front of it and do a boat tour. And I thought, I don't think that would translate well, but let me go and tell stories and jokes. And I wrote some material and ended up doing almost a half hour of comedy. And that was like maybe 3 months after I left. And so for about 8-9 years, I was doing stand-up all around Southern California. And when I would travel to Boston or up to the Northwest to Portland or whatnot, San Francisco, I would do jokes. And I was running a comedy show with some friends of mine, and it was pretty good. And but then we began to struggle to get people in, and we needed new ideas. And I said, what if we do a show with just Jungle Cruise skippers? Because we'd taken a class on how to do stand-up. And I remember one time he was having us deal with hecklers as practice, and I was just crushing people and moving on. And he's like, how do you know how to do all these things? We haven't taught you yet. I went, Jungle Cruise. That's where I learned. And so I realized being a skipper was like a stand-up comedy class. Whereas I learned as a stand-up comic, if you want to get up 3 or 4 times a week, you have to drive really far, and it takes hours just to wait for that one 10-minute spot. Jungle Cruise, you'll do 20 or 30 boat tours a day. And so it's great training ground. So we started the Skipper Show once as a joke, and it sold out super fast. And we did it pretty regularly for about 6 years. And that we took on tour as well. And we do it every once in a while in Anaheim. We might bring it back for some tiki conventions that I've started going to, because it's been pretty popular. And it's a lot of fun. Some skippers do a lot of Disney material, some don't do any. And but it's always a lot of fun. It's always a blast to do. And yeah.
Let's talk about that bond of skippers. What connects generations upon generations of skippers? What is it? Is it sort of like being in the same troop or the same army? What combines these people?
It really is. It's kind of like almost like military vets. When you know, they may have been in different areas of combat, but they all served. And it's probably the most surprising thing I discovered in my work on the Skipper Stories books is I interviewed a guy that was there in the 50s, and we had some of the exact same experiences. He's like, "Oh, don't you know when you're coming around the corner by the backside and your boat will wiggle and do this and you got to slow down?" I'm like, "Yeah, we did the exact same thing 50 years later." And I had a great time interviewing skippers who worked there in the 70s. When it was pretty wild in the 70s, and that kind of came back in the early 2000s, were both kind of wild periods. And some of the wild pranks they would do, and we had done some of the same stuff. So it was really a neat bonding experience, to the point where I would be excited to meet these new skippers that had worked there in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and yet it's like we had worked together because we'd driven the same boats and had the same kinds of guests, and it was you could talk about almost anything and they would have had that same shared experience. And it was really neat. I felt really bonded to these people that I sat in a room with a bunch of skippers that had all worked there in the 70s. And they said it felt like I had worked with them, and I felt the same way. And I even went 2 years ago, I went to a reunion for Walt Disney World Jungle Cruise skippers. And my friends out here were like, "Oh, it's really different. They're a different vibe. They're mostly the college programs, so they're there for a year and then they leave. They don't stay as long as we do." And so I went out there and had the best time. And their jungle is different than ours and their jokes are different, but we still had that same bond and could still tell the same stories. And it was like, all right, these men and women are also part of the club. It's been really fun. And I don't see that at other attractions. There's not that same shared experience because you're not out there with guests trying to entertain them for 10 minutes.
You mention a moment in the book, and I think this is an interesting thing to talk about, especially in today, in shifting cultures, where a woman, a guest, I think it was a woman, approaches and sort of says she has worked with rainforest tribes and says she was offended by the dancing native scenes. And this reminds me, of sort of my own personal struggle, because I'm a massive fan of 1930s 40s pulp and tiki and all of that, and trying to balance my love of that genre with sort of a rather imperialistic early 1900s nature of it. I'm curious how you, not only as a skipper but a professor of history, attempts to understand sort of these darker elements of the Adventureland aesthetic.
Yeah, what a smart intellectual question, and too bad I'm not wearing a suit because that helps me think better. That's my thinking outfit. Yeah, that woman was interesting because she was an extraordinarily white woman and her very white daughter who were just in tears and just so upset, to the point that I wasn't quite sure how to handle it other than telling them to go to City Hall and bring it up with Michael Eisner. And it's interesting. I use it as an exploration in my world civilizations class when I talk about colonialism and imperialism and why at Disneyland, everything has an American flag on it except the building where the Jungle Cruise has a Union Jack on it, because it shows the British were having these big colonies. And it's why I think eventually they're going to take out the whole dancing natives scenes at both Jungle Cruises. I haven't discussed that with anybody at Imagineering. I don't have any secret information. It's just a thought that I have that eventually they're going to feel pressure to take that out. Even though I had guests from Africa that thought it was fantastic. So I don't know. I get involved in the tiki culture a lot, and a friend of mine was worried about cultural appropriation and how much of this. And I think the important thing is tiki culture in America is it's not like pure Polynesian tiki. We mix it in with Americanisms. and a lot of American styles. And so it's morphed, like everything else in America, we take a culture and we morph it in with what we already have to make something new, if that kind of makes sense. And I think before they put in, I know it's different in Florida, but I know before they put in the changes with Indiana Jones in Anaheim, Jungle Cruise was more of just an exploration of a jungle, and let's go see what's out there. Where with Indy, now it's got a sense of, well, now we're exploring territory that we're colonizing and we're exploring and we're doing archaeology, and it's made that a bit more pronounced. And I think you get more complaints about it online than you do in real life. Guests that come, I've never seen, other than that one lady, we don't really get complaints about it. That's why that lady stuck out of my head so much, because she had such a problem with it, and I hadn't seen anyone else who had. Perhaps
the movie that is about to come out with the Jungle Cruise there, that will adjust the aesthetic slightly as well. It takes place in the 30s, if I remember correctly. But I guess we'll have to see how they make those adjustments.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the movie. Yeah, I had a couple friends that were helping at certain levels, and I was told that they bought copies of my first Skipper Stories book for the production crew. So when they were working on it, which was nice to hear. But I'm excited about it. I think they're going to do a good job. I know they want to turn it into like a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of franchise. So I hope it's good and not like the first Haunted Mansion movie. That's
yeah, please. It's not like that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
What made you decide to write the book? I mean, you've now written 2 of them. What was the impetus? Just stories that you felt like these need to be cataloged for future generations, future skippers?
Yeah, well, I had been working on my History of Disneyland class and was working on my class turning that into a book. And I got approached by Theme Park Press, and they asked me, would I write a book where I interview one skipper from each decade and use them to kind of explain that decade? And I thought that was an okay idea, but every skipper I've ever met has at least one story that is funny or insightful that you just had to share. So I pitched back. I said, what if I just interview as many skippers as I can get and get all of their stories? Because there's not one person that represents any one era perfectly. So they liked that idea. So I went about doing all these interviews and tried to get – it was tough getting some people for the first book. That's why the first book is heavily people from my era who I knew and some other people I found online. And the second book is mostly people that were excited after the first book came out. They're like, oh, they hadn't either heard of it or I was trying to get them and they weren't really sure. They were nervous. Like, what are you going to do? And how are you going to treat Disney? But they saw that Disney was, I think, appreciative of my book. I interviewed a few Disney people that were still working for the company. And my own personal rule was if I interviewed you and you worked for Disney, I would give you a copy of the transcript and you could go through and take out stuff you don't want in there. Because the point wasn't to get anybody in trouble. The point was to tell a fun story. Although Disney did edit out one guy's interview where he took out some good stuff that really would have made Disney look good. And I don't know why Disney took it out. But he quit and said, hey, all that stuff I said, you can put it back in the next book. So I'm like, I even went to the people. I said, look, here's the story that's going to be told. And here's how his quote perfectly makes Disney look good, where before it looks like they're not the villain, but they didn't do a great job. And this guy's perspective is perfect. They're like, no, that topic cannot be discussed. Even if it makes us look good, you cannot discuss it. I'm like, well, it's going to be discussed for 3 pages. And his will be perfect. And it proves your point, I think, makes a very valid point. And they're like, nope, can't discuss it no matter what. So it'll be in the third one. But that's where the book came about. The first one, I think it had been out for 3 weeks when the publisher called me and said, how quickly can you give me a second one? And I thought, well, it's going to take a time because I have to interview these people and transcribe them and edit it together. But it's been the most fun project I've ever worked on. I mean, my first book was on the Christian right, so religion and politics. Everybody's 2 favorite topics.
I was going to say, light subjects all around for you.
Exactly. And I'd try to get like speaking engagements at libraries and whatnot. And they're like, oh, yeah, what do you talk about? Yeah, we don't want to hear about that. But Disneyland, everybody wants to hear about it. And when I would finish an interview, I come home all happy and excited. It's always just a joy to write about and fun to deal with. And and the Disney company's been super cooperative with me in doing this interview. I got to interview a friend of mine who is now an Imagineer. And when I interviewed him, he had to have someone from media relations there. And the media relations guy said, now listen, you can't ask him anything about his current projects, and kept going on and on and on about that. So I stopped him and I said, hey, I'm a historian. I could care less about what he's working on in the future. I don't even care personally what he's working on. He'll tell me when it comes out. This is all about the past. So I do the interview for 45 minutes, and the guy was sitting there. He's very nice. And afterwards, he is walking me out. He goes, you didn't ask any questions about his current projects. He goes, everybody says they won't, and then they do. You really don't care. I'm like, no, I don't care. I'm a historian. I'm not a futurist. I could care less about what he's working on. Plus, it's Disney. Whatever he's working on is going to change 4 or 5 times before it shows up. So it's all good. I'll find out eventually. But yeah, it's been a blast.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this. And I've read all of the first book. It's primarily Disneyland, though, correct? There's not a lot of Disney World in this sphere yet.
There's not. And I've been saving it. The next book is going to be History of the Jungle Cruise. That's going to have all 4 of the Jungle Cruises in it, including a fun section on why there wasn't one put in Disneyland Paris. And then there's going to be a 3rd Skipper Stories book called Even More Skipper Stories. That's probably 2 years away. And that one, I have interviews that I've already done with some skippers from Florida. And then I have it lined up. I have one guy from Hong Kong lined up, and then 2 skippers lined up from Japan. So it'll be an all-encompassing one. Yeah. So I started small, and I'm getting bigger and bigger. That's one of the reasons I went back to that reunion of skippers a couple of years ago, was to go make contacts and meet people, and made some neat friends out there. So I met a bunch of new skippers, and they have a very different experience, and it's a lot of fun to hear their stories. So I think people will enjoy reading them.
So beyond writing and teaching, and also doing stand-up, you are known as Dr. Skipper online. Tell us a little bit about your Etsy enterprise.
I have a very small backyard here in Orange County, and I built a fort for my girls, a little play fort when they were really little. And I made the outside look like Jungle Cruise because I was putting jungle plants in the backyard. The inside, it looked like Mary Blair threw up because I let the girls paint it. So it's all pinks and purples and fun designs. I go, but the outside's going to be jungly. And I started making stuff. I made the mistake. I was looking to I wanted a big tiki like totem. And I saw one for $200. And I thought, I could do one cheaper than that. I'll just teach myself how to carve and buy all the tools. And it took me a lot more than that. So I started carving stuff, and I started making signs and putting them up. And a friend of mine, who's actually now, he's a photographer for Disneyland. He's one of their official photographers, came by my house. And he's like, hey, how much? I'll buy those signs off you. How much do you want those for? I'm like, those aren't for sale. They're just, I'll make you one. He's like, hey, you should start an Etsy store. Because my wife had kept telling me, honey, you need to start a store. People will buy this. They love it. And I'm like, nah, just kind of for me and my friends. But then when this other guy came by, and said, yeah, you got to start an Etsy store. So after that day, I'm like, honey, I'm starting an Etsy store. Like, you have to be nice to me. He doesn't. So I started making signs with different Jungle Cruise phrases or sayings, or, like backside of water and stuff, and hippos. And I'll usually make them out of metal, but I take them out to the desert and shoot them up so they look like they've really been shot, and age them. And I make barrels like at the Trader Sam Enchanted Tiki Bar, and I make boat signs, and I just do all kinds of jungly things. And I'll make stuff and stick it in my house and like it, and then I'll put it up for sale, and somebody buys it, and then I get mad because I got to make another for my house. But it's been a lot of fun. I've been going to tiki shows and doing talks about the Jungle Cruise, and I sell my art and my books there. And it's fun to see how big this community is, and how many people love the Jungle Cruise. And the art is just great. It's just a fun expression. I do, it's mostly metal signs I make. I do some other kinds of wood signs with boat names on it, like the names of all the Jungle Cruise boats from the different parks and the rivers. And I do a lot of tiki masks, and those I do mostly for my own backyard, but I still put them up for sale. But that's where my history PhD comes in, because I like to remember we talked about colonialism and whatnot, that I'll take a tiki mask and then I'll combine different cultures together on it. And then I like to add ancient art, because one of the things I teach is ancient Greek and Roman history. So I'll take elements from like the Etruscans and the ancient Greeks, and I'll add that element to a tiki mask to make it look very different. So it's all kinds of cultures that are mixed together in one kind of mask. And I find that to be, it's a fun outlet for me. And I'm really happy that people like it. So that's been going on for about 4 years. And it's gotten bigger every year. And I sell my books on there as well, besides just Amazon.
You have also been given quite the honor. You've been immortalized in Jungle Cruise lore thanks to the Skipper Canteen at Disney World, where your name is on a barrel. How'd you find out about all that?
That barrel is my third child, and I love it as much as my girls. I think I told you about the guy that was an Imagineering who I interviewed, who had he was the one that designed most of that restaurant. And before it opened, he sent me a picture. He's like, hey, this is what I'm working on now. And he sent me a few pictures, and he's like, these can't go public for a week, so don't tell anybody. So I'm looking at them. I'm like, oh, these are really nice. That's cool. And he goes, here's the main dining room. Sends me a picture. I'm like, oh, that's great. He's like, see that barrel in the corner? I'm like, yeah, I see it in the distance. And he sends me another close-up of it. And I just about fainted when I saw my name on there. He's like, and he hid the names of people all through. So I finally got to go there 2 years ago. And my name's on a book in the library and on another like call sheet about a Follies, or like a comedy act. But to see names of people that I knew and worked with kind of hidden all through the Skipper Canteen was just one of the highlights of my life. I was there with another skipper, the guy that designed the cover for my books, Trevor Kelly, a great skipper and a great graphic designer artist. We were having lunch at the Skipper Canteen, and I go to pay with my card, and the waitress goes, oh, David Marley, just like Dr. Marley, just like the barrel. And before I could say anything, my friend goes, he is the Dr. Marley from the barrel. And I'd gone over to take a selfie of myself next to the barrel. And the guy whose section that was in the restaurant goes, oh, it's the famous Dr. Marley here to take a picture with his barrel. And he walked away. And I'm like, because outside of Cal State Fullerton, nobody calls me Dr. Marley or Professor Marley. So it kind of threw me. And then later after lunch, my buddy came over with a real camera. I'm like, all right, because it's my author photo on the book, on the second book, me and the barrel. So he goes to take my picture, and the waiter comes by and goes, oh, we all heard today that the famous Professor Marley's coming with his camera crew to get a picture taken with the barrel. And my friend goes, I don't think he knows you're really Professor Marley. So when I paid for the meal, when they saw my card, the manager came over. It's like, you're Professor Marley. And we started talking, and they gave us a little tour of the restaurant and all the different things. And they were very excited that I was there. And it was just, my friend goes, you are going to be impossible to live with for at least a month. And at the end, they're like, oh, have you been to Jungle Cruise yet? And I said, no, we just got to the park. This is our first stop. We're going to go next. And then this hostess goes, come on, I'm going to take you guys. And she walked us over to the Jungle Cruise. She's like, I was a skipper before I moved over to the canteen. And she introduced me to the lead there. They're like, these are the guys, that's the barrel, and he's working on a book, and put him on a boat. And so it was a great experience. So I can't wait to take my wife there so she can see the barrel as well.
As we finish up here, I have one last question for you. If tomorrow, with no financial reasons to weigh, would you go back?
Oh boy, I get asked this a lot. I think I would go back if I didn't have to worry about working like at Fantasmic or working a grad night or a parade shift. When I worked there, they knew I wouldn't work those other shifts. I would call in sick or trade them away to somebody. So if there's a way where I could deal with that, just go and do the boat and do my jokes and not have to deal with all the other kind of hassle about it, I think I could be persuaded to work a couple shifts a week. Yeah, especially if they'd still let me write my books, but I don't know if that would be if they would let that happen.
Yeah.
Most skippers I said their retirement plan, they would love to retire and go back a couple days a week. And wouldn't that be fun? I'm like, that would be a blast. It was a lot of fun to do.
Well, Skipper David John Marley, thank you so much for coming on Dreamfinders.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And that's all she wrote for today's Dreamfinders. Thanks to David John Marley for coming aboard and telling us some stories. Make sure to look for Dr. Skipper, all one word, on Etsy for some jungle crafts, and you can find his books Skipper Stories and More Skipper Stories down the Amazon. What's that? Oh, on Amazon. This little show is edited by Shannen Michaelsen. It's hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at Some Stuff I Said. Our show's artwork is provided by J.P. Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This radio show is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. If you or someone you know would make a great guest on this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@WDWNT.com. If you like the show, give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. If you didn't, you are listening to This American Life. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.
Dreamfinders is sponsored by Never Grow Up Vacations, the official travel partner of WDWNT.com. Never Grow Up Vacations specializes in trips to Disney destinations around the world. So be like us and never grow up. Head over to nevergrowupvacations.com to book your next trip today.